Good morning. My name's Rod Hutchings. I'm coming from Melbourne, Australia, where it's just after midnight. So, really looking forward to today's panel where we're talking about data informed HR. We all recognise the increasing importance of data in HR. Traditional methods aren't enough. We now can use data to really make the HR function really strategic. So today, our panel of experts are going to help us navigate this, sharing insights in leveraging data for better decision making. We'll be tackling just identifying what's critical, ensuring accuracy, and providing value to stakeholders. So to get us started, let's bring forward our panelists, please. And good morning, everybody. And looking forward to the conversation today. And to get us going, we'll just start with the normal introductions, and we'll go around clockwise on our virtual screen, and start with Emily, please. So, welcome, Emily.
Hi, thanks. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Emily Killam. I am Senior Director and Head of Workforce Transformation Center at Perceptyx, and I'm really excited to join. I love talking about HR decision making and how we can make better decisions when we use data both inside and outside of our space.
Thank you. And good morning, Sally.
Good morning. So my name's Sally. I have been an HR practitioner for over 15 years, turned entrepreneur about 6 years ago. I now run HRWise, which is a cloud-based HRIS solution, and I'm in the Canadian part of the world out in Montreal. So today I'm really excited. Obviously, HRIS centralizes data, and then what? So yeah, that's why I'm here today.
Excellent. It'd be great to hear from you. And Vaclav.
Hi, good morning. My name is Václav. I have been in the HR space for almost 25 years, and the last 20 years as an HR director. Lately, I have established my own consultancy training business, and I'm highly interested in the topic of data analytics and how it can help HR. Since I think I've always had an analytic mind. And I've also been keen on the technology and computers since my early childhood. So I really love this connection of, data analytics and the HR, which is sort of the soft part of the business.
Excellent. Well, I'm sure we've had a few panels on data before together, so I'm sure you'll have plenty of great stuff to share. And last but not least, Alyssa.
Great. Thanks, Rod. I thought it was difficult to be up at 7 o'clock on the West Coast, and you're up over midnight. So thank you so much. I have a whole new appreciation for time today. I have over 15 years of experience in HR as a strategic leader, global expansion, scaling, and really important to me is the employee experience. Using data back in the day when you had spreadsheets and access. And so now that we have technology, I'm excited to talk about this because in a field where EQ can sometimes be the leading skill, now with having data to back that up and really have a powerful combination to make good decisions, really just it's a nice balance of the human aspect, the data, and I'm excited to talk about it because I think that really brings HR to the forefront and really can be the leader of the conversation for business decisions.
Excellent. So, we'll get started into our main questions, and I guess we'll start just by trying to set the foundation to our conversation. And what I want to ask is, how has the role of data analytics evolved in HR? And what do you think the future holds? And to get us started with that, I might ask Vaclav to give us a go at that one.
Sure. The role of data analytics in HR has undergone a significant transformation in the recent years. I mean, shifting from primarily administrative function to a strategic tool for driving business growth. Initially, HR analytics was primarily used for basic reporting and compliance. However, as technology advanced and data became more accessible, it began to play a more pivotal role in decision making. HR analytics now provides insights that inform strategic decisions. For example, data can be used to identify talent gaps, optimize recruitment strategies, and measure the effectiveness of training programs. And by analyzing data on employee satisfaction, turnover rates, and performance metrics, HR can identify factors that contribute to employee engagement and retention. This enables them to implement targeted initiatives to improve the employee experience. And data analytics can be also used to assess individual and team performance, identify high potential employees, and provide personalized feedback and development opportunities, which is like the topic that resonates with me the most personally. And HR departments are also increasingly now using predictive analytics to forecast future trends, such as turnover rates, hiring needs, skill shortages, and that allows them to proactively address potential challenges and seize opportunities. And as technology continues to evolve, the role of data analytics in HR is expected to become even more prominent. And artificial intelligence and machine learning will enable HR departments to automate tasks, analyze vast amounts of data, and make more accurate predictions. The focus will shift from analytics to actually prescriptive analytics, which actually involves using data not only to describe what has happened in the past, but also to help HR people to understand what needs to happen in the future in order to correct the trends which we see happening. And in conclusion, the role of data analytics in HR has evolved significantly, transforming it from a supporting function to a strategic asset. And as technology continues to advance, HR professionals will need to embrace data-driven approaches to effectively manage the workforce and contribute to the success of their organizations.
Wow, that's a lot. But
I have a little add-on just to piggyback on what you mentioned. I agree with your conclusion. I think data is one of the driving forces behind the evolution of the HR role. I think that we all entered it long enough ago where HR was very administrative focused. And this data has enabled this practice to become more strategic, to become a decision maker, to sit around the round table. And recently, I don't know if you all agree, but recently I'm seeing not only HR professionals becoming senior executive, becoming C-level roles, which honestly did not exist 10 years ago. C-suite in HR and people functions did not exist. So we're finding them in C-suite. But even beyond that, recently I'm seeing a lot of people-related professionals becoming actual leaders of organizations that are not HR focused. So presidents and CEOs of technology businesses and whatever other kinds of businesses, because the role has become so strategic in practice. And I think that the data behind it and the analytics and the AI has enabled us to step into that kind of strategy.
Yeah, that's some great points, Sally. I think the amount of value that comes and you can bring to the organization and identify blind spots and all this stuff you can get by really being able to be smart with the data and be able to talk about it and actually understand your organization. I think it really opens that up. Has anyone else got anything to add?
Well, it's just been fascinating to me to watch over the last 25 or so years that I've been working in this field and partnering with some of the leading organizations to say, how can we help their HR function, enable them with data to help them get into a more strategic role around that table. And, when I started, that was a foreign concept to people. It was something new that we were trying to introduce. It was a conversation about how can we up-level you? How can we help you tell the stories with data that you need to get into those rooms? And now it's assumed that HR can get in those rooms because HR is having those conversations. So it's been fascinating to watch that evolve and watch them become real partners with organizations that we typically thought held the data, like finance, to understand that in fact, people data, everything from where people are sitting, who's sitting there, and what talent demographics they're bringing to the table, clear through to their sentiments about their experience at every point in an employee's life cycle, really changing the conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. Yeah, and it probably also makes a difference about the size of the organizations we're talking about too. Like there'll be, the small organizations, large organizations where, maybe my assumption is larger organizations can take more advantage of data, but that's not necessarily true either. All right. So we might move on to the next question, and maybe this actually brings in large, small. I'm just curious about data. So I guess we've established data is so critical and it is recognised being important for organisations. So what I'm curious about is then what are some challenges and opportunities for transforming HR into a data-driven function? Because maybe organisations are at different parts on the journey of getting to that place, and many are really in the midst of doing it right now. I'm familiar of a number of them, certainly in our country. So, and I might come to you, Emily, to start us on that. So what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think one of the key challenges for me is that, because it's evolved so rapidly, and because 20 years ago there just simply weren't a lot of data function outside of compliance and reporting that exist within HR, those more strategic data skills, not all of our most experienced HR folks have those skills. And so how do we begin to build new teams within the HR function, whether that be a people analytics team, whether we figure out how to partner with an IT team that does data science, but it's understanding how to bring those skills, but also meld those skills with a lot of those softer people skills that we hope our HR function has. So creating advanced training programs, but then working with someone to understand and evaluate the effectiveness of those training programs, understanding that we have a different target audience for who we might be recruiting into the organization, but then encouraging at the same time to make sure that our employment tests don't have bias in them, that the experience once they arrive shows up and they're reporting it in that sentiment that they're reporting that it's working for them. So it's bringing a variety of skills with some of those existing skills and really building that up, I think, is one of the key opportunities, but also can be a key challenge for organizations.
I don't know that I can add anything to that, Emily. I agree fully. Yeah.
Yes.
Ditto.
Yes, ditto. And what about the perspective of, like this to say, we might have people that are in the audience that are from a small. Yeah. Can you hear me all right? Because
We can hear you, Ed.
Okay, good. I can just hear multiple voices. I'm not sure why. Weird. Yeah, I'm just wondering about what about small organisations? Does it make a difference with a small organisation? If you're a HR function of one, what would you do?
I would definitely be leveraging any data I could get my hands on, just because that's going to be my second person in the department in reality. Trying to do I've been an HR person of one and doing it manually in the old days of spreadsheets and VLOOKUPs and pulling data together and then trying to tell a story. And then the big piece, and I think Emily hit on this, is the data trusted? Where's the data coming from? Belief that that's what the employees are saying, or that's what the compensation study says, and things of that nature. And so a lot of that is building relationships and the trust in the data. But as an HR person of one, having that data to support what you're seeing as an HR professional is so important. So that would be the first thing, is how do you get tools to do that? And there's so many free tools that are happening right now. I mean, you can go and pay for them, but smaller organizations generally don't have an HR budget. And so there's a lot of free tools available nowadays that will at least allow you to insert some information and things where you can go and make data and be able to tell a story, which is the big piece, right? You have this data, now how do you tell the story and have somebody willing to sit at the table and listen to you if you are at a small organization, HR person of one, where they think that your role may be administrative versus actually helping them make decisions. And earlier it was talked about, skill gaps. And I think that's the big piece we don't talk a lot about, is where that data helps. I know we're going to talk about retention later, but I think it's the key piece of, it's not really the retention number that we're after. It's all the sub things that fall into that. And how do we solve for that?
And with regards to small organizations, I would also add that a lot of smaller organizations or one person HR departments will feel blocked by the lack of historical data. So firstly, I mean, obviously you want to start somewhere, start building your history. But secondly, as a small organization, the comparisons don't always have to be to yourself. There are other small organizations out there who do have data points that you can easily access on the web. So I think that even if you haven't started yet, you can still tell that story, to your point, Alyssa.
Well, and in a small organization too, I think, all of us have limited time, right? So when you're an HR person of one, I loved what you said, Alyssa, about utilizing the data as the second employee to really say, hey, that's my partner in doing this, and how can I create a shortcut for doing that? But I also think where there is a skill gap, and when we do have those skill gaps, people are going to naturally gravitate towards the things that they can do well and efficiently. And so creating those partnerships across the organization to say, okay, hey, can I borrow 3 hours of your time a week to help me truly understand the data that we're producing as an organization, whether that is the finance department of one, whether that is the IT department, whoever that is, to truly dig in and understand and create those real partnerships. And those real partnerships are going to extend into larger organizations as well, because when you think about, I think Voxel said, like we've got performance management. That's a function of HR, but truly understanding performance management depends on understanding what each function does, how it's measured, why it's measured. Can those data be racked and stacked, or do we need to put certain controls in place to help us understand who the top performers are? And so those partnerships are going to be key really in any size organization. It's how you use them that may look a little different.
Yeah, small, really great points there. And I guess I'm curious about, I think with small organizations, probably tapping into cloud-based like systems that exist, that where your implementation of a system that where you're going to store the data. I think there's lots of different avenues to do that as well. That's sort of another opportunity, because that's really, I guess, keys, where you're going to store the data, how you're going to store it, and is it going to be consistent, really critical, so that you can actually then draw insights. It is an element that's quite critical. All right, I think we've probably covered that. So in terms of, I guess, then going a bit deeper then, so there's challenges to getting systems. The next critical part, though, is about really, I guess, identifying, what's the most critical data points HR should be collecting to help inform strategic decision making. And let's have a go at that particular topic or subtopic, and I'll ask Sally to start us off on that one.
Sure. And I don't think that anything that I'm going to mention is going to be groundbreaking by any means. But obviously, you want to look at employee engagement and satisfaction. How's that going within your organization? That's one of the critical points. And it's going to drive things, including turnover and retention, which is another one that's really important, which I think, like you said, we'll talk about in more detail at a later time. So employee engagement, satisfaction, turnover, and retention that are associated to that. The other thing that employee engagement and satisfaction may drive that we don't often think about is performance metrics. If you're unhappy within the organization, you might not be giving it your best self. And if you aren't giving it your best self, then perhaps performance drops from there on. And performance, speaking of performance beyond individual performance, is the organization tracking strategic goals at a higher level, and then potentially cascading those down to teams, to people, et cetera, because it is a snowball effect when one person within a team isn't pulling their weight, and so on and so forth. Obviously, in this day and age, if you're not talking about diversity and inclusion, both gathering the data of who is amongst the team and what we should be working towards, there's something missing for sure. I think that's a top priority. And then beyond that, the other typical things, we're going to be looking at compensation and benefits and making sure that, going back to employee engagement and performance, are your employees equitably compensated, not only internally and equitably, but also compared to the rest of the industry or the region. And that's something that we often forget. I mean, personally, I've been working in an organization that's been international for over 10 years now. And we often compare within, and we forget that different regions do have different compensation expectations, et cetera. So that's another one that's really important. And I think also one that perhaps we often forget, training and development. So if I'm going back to performance again, so if we found that there are performance gaps, perhaps they're linked to employee engagement, perhaps they're linked to training and development. Oftentimes we will kind of go straight to lack of motivation, et cetera. But I think training and development need a little bit more focus. So it could very well be that, are we going to implement a new mentorship program or a buddy system or something that's going to help us perhaps in our onboarding, make sure that the people that we're hiring are getting the tools that they need to ramp up. So honestly, I'm just scratching the surface. But I think in the end, regardless of all of the data points that you want to gather, I'm going to say the most important thing, and today, especially as a business leader, is to make sure that you are linking all of the data sets back somehow to your organization's strategic goals and initiatives and your long-term vision and mission. I mean, that's what we're aiming for in the end at all times.
Yes, some great points there again, Sally. I think the whole the training, just knowing your people, know what training they've done. So you need to be able to store that information is really critical to help me just make decisions about where you're going to leverage people and leverage skills. What do people bring to organizations is quite critical. Some organizations, you collect so much data when you're going through the recruitment process, and you collect all the data on what training they've done and what qualifications they've got. Do we always bring that put that information into your knowledge systems on individuals like that? That's an area to look at as well.
And recruitment, Rod, you just mentioned it. What a great point. I missed recruitment, but within your recruitment, who's applying to your jobs? Where are they applying from? Why are they applying from there? There is so much juice. I mean, I think we're all data geeks on this call. We could get into this, but that was a really great point for sure.
Anyone else got anything to add about data points?
I just really want to touch on the learning and development piece of that, because I think that is an area that sometimes becomes a sub thread of some other data point, but I really think it needs to come and be a main point, a main KPI, something on your dashboard that's really tracking how your employees are growing within your organization. Are they growing? Are we providing opportunities? Sally mentioned, do we have a mentor program? All of those things happen. When we're worried about how many people are leaving or the regretted attrition, how many people are leaving that we don't want to leave, but they're usually leaving. We all know people leave jobs because of people, but at the end of the day, sometimes they're not getting the opportunities. Sally was mentioning, are people not being productive? Well, are they not being productive because they're not in the right role? I've many times have had great conversations with employees and managers and realized that their skill set would be better suited somewhere else. And then, the trajectory of their career at the organization is completely transformed. And I think it's just that's where, you don't want to lose the EQ piece of being an HR professional and a leader and really being intuitive about what's going on and observing. But the data helps that EQ really bring things, your intuitive knownness, and then being able to make that powerful combination so that your story is selling to that strategic vision of the organization and saying, this goal of the HR team is going to feed into X goal of the organization, and then making that partnership with finance because they hold the money and being able to get some of that budget is always helpful. But I don't think we put enough emphasis. My niche is manager training. I love first-time managers and making sure that they're successful in a new role that they've never had before. But I think that if we were to really focus on growing employees, I think we would see a much different relationship than what we're seeing right now. You can be on any social platform you want, and the employer and the employee relationship is broken right now. And how do we bring that together? Data is helping us. Data is telling us that employees are not happy. Employers are not happy. But how do we get it to the table and have a conversation about solving that? And there's data available to show you how we could possibly do that and create those action plans, I think is really critical.
And Alyssa, you reminded me of something. You mentioned growth and development, and it's such a good point because I mentioned diversity and inclusion specifically. Who are you hiring, et cetera, and who is your team made of? I had a client who was reviewing their data, and they had a beautifully diverse organization, but in reviewing their data realized that as diverse as their organization was, promotions were not diverse. Promotions were very niche to a specific group of people. And that's a kind of realization you can make with the data. Sorry, Emily, I think you wanted to add something.
Oh, no, I was going to say that I really loved what Alyssa, you said about not forgetting that we're still in the people business in HR. And so sometimes I think we've gotten so far, from someone who tried to push data into HR 25 years ago to say, let's make great decisions based on data. Now, sometimes I find myself pulling people back to say, we've got all the spreadsheets are open, right? All the tech is open. We've got 85 dashboards and they all have important data on them. But how do we figure out what is the most important data? And then how do we quickly get to action? Because now we're spending a lot of time paralyzed in the analysis to say, but what if, do I need to pull in one more piece of data, or I have to go get another piece of data? And instead, we are spending far more time creating a dissertation about why we should do something instead of using our gut, trusting our gut to say, here are the things that we know is going to work well. And do we have data that support that, or can we disprove our gut? And then let's move on to making the real changes in the organization that are going to keep people there, keep people engaged, keep people on the right career path for them. I think that's particularly true of first-time managers. Alyssa, as you said, those are your passion. I love teaching management too. And as I've thought through it, I think we overwhelm new managers with data because they don't have the training and the understanding of how to do it, but they do want to do a great job. And so if we can simplify for them, hey, here's one cool thing you need to know how to go do it, I think we're going to be much better off.
I think that's a great segue into the integrity and data quality. Is the data right? Is it the data we want? All of those things. And I think we just have to go back to our gut. I think you named it, Emily, is that we just have to go back to our gut, where sometimes we question the data, but why do we do that? And maybe it's because we're hearing something different. How many times have we run data internal about employees and the data says one thing and we're like, that's not what I'm hearing in the water cooler on the street. And so now you're trying to marry them. And so how do you make sure that the data still has validity and can be credible at the table, but then also validating what you're really hearing on the street and maybe not being represented in the data because the surveys are not trusted, the whole psychological safety and employee trust and things of that nature. And Sally, kind of full circle to when you said, they had a great diverse organization, but there was definitely a niche group of employees being promoted. And so I was like, wow, I wonder what the rest of the data looked like in that organization, which probably led them down a path incorrectly, potentially for some other action items versus actually doing the right action items just because the data said one thing. But, if you actually step back and take a look at the bigger picture, you have a little bit of a different viewpoint or a different perspective on what should be happening. I think, you know, making sure that where we're getting the data is really important, you know, making sure that, I think another thing is cultural resistance. You know, we're shifting from traditional HR. I think, Emily, you touched on this in the beginning, and now we're trying to go into this data-driven culture, but are we pushing too hard? And I think in business, when you're pushing product, you can push product probably faster than you can push people. People need to move incrementally. And so the change management of that, I think, can be really hard and create a lot of resistance inside of that organization as you're trying to validate or make data credible within the organization.
Yeah, like talking about this data quality integrity to drive insights. I think one of the challenge, like I'm in the Air Force, which has, you know, obviously been around for a long time, and trying to you know, look for certain data, certain information. When the data's been collected over, you know, the last, in my lifetime in the Air Force, 40 years, the data collected 40 years ago can be so different than the way you connect it today. And so when you're trying to draw these insights across the organization, if the data actually you don't have standards of the way that you actually collect the base data. So it could be just as simple as, you know, how you describe someone has a computing science degree. Can be, if you put in the system differently, how do you actually then draw insights later? So I think one of the things, you know, that I'm sort of heavily working at the moment is just that standardization, like, because garbage in can just give you different answers than what your actual organization looks like. And you know, and we certainly have a lot of that with our data, is that we've just, over time, people have used different ways to describe the same thing. I'm not sure if, does that make sense?
Well, I think it's because business evolves, right? Information and people evolve. So the way that we've collected data or the way that we analyze it is in a different way. You know, using employee engagement surveys, I think, is a good example. Some people use ENPS, some people use their own, some people only use one question. Some organizations are using multiple questions. And so at each organization, the ENPS could be something completely different. And so how do you standardize that across it, whether it's an industry or just be able to benchmark yourself against other organizations your size or larger, or, you know, how do you know what the goal is in terms? And yes, there's standards and things, but if you're not doing it the exact same way, then should there be an asterisk? Or, you know, how are you, is your survey results actually aligned with the standard enough to where you could actually use the standard that you're using? So I think that's that whole other part. I think we're all just really excited that there's actually data. Our tools are now actually providing data. I keep saying spreadsheets, but I used to do employee surveys via spreadsheets and then have to parse out all of the demographics and tenure and all of demographics, and it would take days to do this. And you know, now there's tools that can do this live. You know, as the survey's coming in, you can kind of see what's happening and things of that nature, which really allow you to start building insights immediately and start building an action plan and story for leadership, so that, you know, you can go in and create buy-in aligned with their strategic vision of the organization. And I think that's super important, because before, it took us a long time, or you had to parse through all the qualitative data, because you didn't have, you know, sentiment and things of that nature to go along with it that would give you kind of a quick read. Before, you had to read how many hundreds of comments so that you could get kind of a thesis going. And so it's really streamlined our role as an HR professional and leader in the organization, and us being able to, I think, us coming to the table with information quicker has allowed us to have a little bit more credibility in things. Sales are coming in, it's $10 in, $10 in, $10 in, right? You know, it's kind of hard to do that when you're working with people, because we're not assigned a number. At least I don't want us to be assigned a number. And, you know, so it makes it a little bit more difficult to create formulas and, you know, solutions and data across that. So I think that we're getting data faster, which is making it really easy
Yeah.
And then you think each organization has to define what their standards are and how they're going to do it. And this is how we're going to equate that. I know some organizations like to do things a little off standard, and that's okay too. But just make it transparent. What are you actually judging? Not judging, but what's the criteria that you're, and then share that across the organization. Like, this is what our goal is. This is how we're doing it. I think is super important. So the employees also know what their participation role is inside of that. I think is super important.
Yeah, I think you made several great points there. The thing about timeliness, I think that's really critical, particularly where you do these surveys. Like, you know, maybe in the past, and this is probably talking about even about myself, would be that just think, okay, it's just a black hole. I'll fill this in, and nothing's going to happen with it. So if you can actually, get quite timely feedback, and you are transparent, another key word you mentioned, you can get much more rich information and rich input from the actual employees, which, you know, is really what you're really after. You really want to get great input, and you want to be able to analyze it and then reflect it back, and people to actually see themselves in the stories that you can tell from the data. So yeah, some really good points. Anyone else want to add onto that before we move on? All right.
Yeah, I just wanted to contribute a little bit by saying that, you know, naturally you will encounter this problem with the data integrity and quality when you have to analyze a series of data points across, like you said, several decades, or you just encounter a huge amount of data. And you realize that the data were gathered under different assumptions, right? Different standards. And in the past, it was, well, at some point it was not a problem because there was not so much of data, and the machines were not so good to analyze them. And then it started to become a problem. And then that's where the AI and the big data technology came to help, and basically to take away all this brain racking out of this task, because somehow the machines can sort of analyze the data and the patterns from many different angles in a split of a second, which humans are not able to do. And then they can identify trends and sort of put it. Sometimes it's not really, the machine can also make a mistake. So there has to be some sort of a checkpoint or something like that. But it can do a lot of this streamlining and analyzing the data without actually the need to categorize or streamline, or the traditional way of working with data we used to do in the past. Like if you didn't put the dot into that sort of Excel cell, then it didn't work. So that's not the case now with the new technology, with the AI. So I think the AI and the machine learning and big data have a lot of they actually can make or they can help a lot with this, with analyzing inconsistent data, or data that can come from many different sources, and they can help to streamline and actually come out or derive meaningful insights from that like large data sets and inconsistent data sets.
Yep. Thanks for that, Clive. All right. Well, I think we'll move on. So we've spoken about data analytics role, challenges, opportunities, key data points, and what we need to do to ensure data quality. So we've got data in the system. So now I'm just curious about, if we just talk about, what are some of the essential sort of metrics, KPIs, that are tracked, analyze? What are some of the common metrics that are key? And I might come to Emily for that one. Thank you. Start us off.
Yeah, so I think Sally mentioned a bunch earlier, like of actual metrics that should be tracked. So engagement and employee experience sentiments, and that occurs at really every stage across the employee lifecycle. I think there are also an opportunity, and technology really helps with this, to create qualitative data points where people can create ideas, maybe a digital suggestion box, other types of crowdsourced ideas that might come through that might be really helpful. And there are, of course, all of the compliance metrics that we've probably tracked for a long time, understanding things about compensation equity and representation in specific jobs. But, those are all numbers that we can track, right? That we can keep track of over time. But then I think we really want to say, if we're going to be a strategic function in HR, then actually we need to think through, are we trying to track change or are we trying to make change? And if we want to be change makers in an organization, tracking is only a very small part of that. And so how do we start with the end in mind? I could list 200 performance metrics that an organization might want to track, but I think understanding what is the strategic plan for your year? What are those OKRs or KPIs that the organization is tracking at an organizational level? And how do we, instead of being a people pillar where we have our own metrics, perhaps we do, because maybe all organizations are going to have their own pillars to track, but how do we say, what piece do people play in each of those key areas that the organization is tracking and working towards? So if there's an organizational goal of delighting customers, how do our people impact that? How do we unpack that? So if delighting customers is the goal for the year, then we need to ask questions about, well, what do our customers say about how our people might influence the customer's experience? Is the problem that they don't have a consistent team when they partner with us? So we need to fix turnover. Is the problem that the people, it takes too many times for the customer to get an answer correctly? Well, that's a training and development issue, right? So then we can talk about how people can influence that. So understanding the big changes the organization wants to make and aligning the people to that, and then learning what those metrics are. And those are really the ones we want to focus on in our limited amount of time.
Emily, do you find that more and more, because you mentioned we HR may have their own KPIs, but we got to kind of connect to the end goal, which I agree. But do you find that a lot of departments or actual practice leaders now have HR KPIs within their own responsibilities versus, like, we're at the data center, we can provide the data and help with the analysis. But I'm finding personally that the department itself is becoming more and more responsible for their own training and development and for their own turnover rates, et cetera. What's your take on that?
I think I've seen it both ways. Because people know those HR metrics are so important, they understand that it's connecting to their own training and development goals. So they know their people are not upskilled the way they need to, or they know, hey, it takes 8 months for someone to even get up to speed here. So first of all, how do we shorten the amount of time it takes them to get up to speed? But maybe it's a highly skilled job that truly does take that. Well, then being able to keep people 3 more months, 6 more months are really important. So really HR serving as that consultant to partner with them to say, okay, if that's your problem, if your problem is you need people to stay 6 more months in this position on average, how might we together get there? So that HR is not working in isolation on some retention goal that is an overall company retention goal, but that doesn't help us with the key talent that takes too long to ramp up or the key position. And so really being that integrated partner is much more effective for organizational effectiveness. Perhaps not for HR effectiveness, that might make it harder, but for organizational effectiveness, if you're not partnering, people are missing the people component, right? They just don't have the expertise and knowledge to know that. I mean, it would be the same as if you were trying to do profitability and people were selling deals that weren't profitable, right? Well, the finance group has to work with the sales group to make sure that we're all on the same page. And it's the same way with HR.
Sally, I think you hit on something very important, is if another group is kind of already moving forward and maybe the HR isn't ready, hasn't developed something, but they're moving forward, let's go. By no way is HR the provider or the gatekeeper of such programs. If sales or your engineering team, your operations team is ready to move forward for something, or they have an idea, then let's jump in and support them. And how can we provide them the tools and maybe the metrics, because we want them to align with what we're doing. And maybe we're jumping on their train as they're moving forward, just because maybe we weren't in a position to do that. I've been in an organization where, you know, I always find engineering teams are always moving leaps and bounds ahead of the rest of the organization, just because they kind of have an idea and they move forward. They work in that very agile mindset, and I'm like, let's go. Okay, this is great. Now I have a beta, which helps my storytelling for an organizational program, which is so helpful. And so while some people say, oh, I'm waiting for HR to develop this, no, if you have an idea, how can we support you in doing that, but allowing you to lead it inside of your own department, I think is super critical. I don't want leaders in the organization or employees in the organization have to wait on HR. Absolutely not. Actually, that makes our job easier. If you want to go ahead and run, just, you know, give us a heads up. We'd love to help you and, you know, make sure that we can build that story for, you know, future programs across the organization. That actually, it's brilliant.
So, I mean, it is brilliant. Do we have experience of that happening? Some examples, maybe.
I think it's brilliant because I've seen it happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the piece of it. It was around career development. We had employees that wanted to move laterally across the organization, and while we were not necessarily focused on promotions, but I just started building ad hoc career learning paths for employees. And it was time consuming at the time, but we were able to show that they were effective, you know, over a 12-month period of time. And people were moving into roles across the organization. This goes back to our earlier conversation, is why are people not being productive, or why are they not happy, or why are they leaving? You know, they may be looking for something new, but they don't want to leave the organization, but opportunities have not come forward to them. And they were waiting for a program. Someone's like, oh, I'd really like to learn, you know, more about the sales operation. That looks like it's really fun, blah, blah. Okay, well, let's talk about it. Let's talk to your manager. Let's talk to sales. How do we get some job shadowing? What are some skills that you would need to learn? How can we do that? And then when a role opens up, okay, let's add you into the interview path and see how that works out and things of that nature. And, you know, I was coaching them along the way as they were going through the process. And then you start to see that over and over inside the organization. And now they're like, oh, now we have a whole internal mobility program about employees moving around the organization and just not up. I tell people there's so many ways to move your career up, lateral, you know, I don't ever want to say a demotion, because some people are looking for, you know, oh, I'd love to go do that. And they're like, oh, well, that looks like a step down. Why is it a step down if it's something that I would like to go learn and do? Retention is key, and we're trying to keep employees in the house, right? And so employees should control the narrative of their career, and we should be supporting them in that and building programs around that. And when employees have ideas about how to do that and we want to keep them, I think it's good for us to listen and take action.
You know, I've seen two places it worked really well, and they both came from ideas that employees brought. And they were programs that were developed not in HR, but outside of HR that I think HR learned from, right? One was they created a day in the life program, and they invited people from different departments to come to their team meetings once a month. And so they actually got to learn the different job positions that existed within the organization. And that was important to them because they really wanted to work on interdepartmental cooperation. And so understanding what a day in the life looks like from somebody in role, an individual contributor in role, really helped them then to go back and discuss how actions they were taking were making that person's life either harder or easier, but it helped work through that cooperation issue. Another one was they each picked a mentor in a different department. So they wanted to do career development, but they needed a mentor, but they wanted to learn mentorship, not from within role, which they already had great programs that existed there, but how might we do something else in our business? And so both were really cool programs that came up in a normal kind of sat down with your survey results and said, what do I want to go do, learn, be? And both those programs were really successful.
Yeah, I think Emily and Alicia, you brought up, you know, really great points about when you do things off center, how do organizations actually, you know, capture that, because to actually see you as the person. Maybe you do things outside of the organization that would be valuable inside. How do you get that recognized in your data, in your system, so you can be considered for opportunities that, obviously are, highly motivating to different individuals? How do you actually see those individuals so you can actually, leverage those skills? All right, we've 10 minutes remaining. It's amazing. Like, I had about 4 more questions, but I'm sure I'm not going to get through them. But we get the next question. Talk about data analytics. How do we use data analytics to help optimize the recruitment process and improve the candidate experience? And come to Vaclav on that one.
Well, I think we have already touched this a little bit, and it's quite clear that data analytics can significantly enhance the recruitment process by providing valuable insights into candidate behavior, preferences, and the effectiveness of our recruitment strategies, right? So we can track the performance of different recruitment channels, job boards, social media, referrals, and determine which one are the most effective. We can create targeted recruitment campaigns that appeal to specific demographics or skill sets, also increasing the likelihood of attracting the right candidates. We can analyze the data to identify pain points in the application process and make necessary improvements to reduce candidate drop-off rates, identify bottlenecks in the recruitment process, optimize our ATS, optimize the workflow, improve efficiency, and reduce the time to hire. And also, we can employ predictive analytics in a way to assess the candidate's suitability based on various factors: skills, experience, personality traits. I remember an example from many years ago. That was the HR director of Pepsi, and he liked to cite this example in all of his speeches, and that was way before actually the artificial intelligence and all these data analytics tools started, and he just did it in a spreadsheet. And by combining various factors and various analytics, he managed to change the criteria for hiring the sales force for Pepsi in the US, and it resulted in significant gain of a market share against the biggest competitor, which was Coca-Cola, obviously. So I think using data to optimize the recruitment process, also improve the candidate experience, and attract the top talent is a topic that every organization has to put on the table nowadays and think about seriously.
We might actually move on to that question, which is around how do we, and I'll come to Alyssa on this one, around just how do we leverage data insights about identifying and developing high potential talent. Like, then that's really the talent you want to keep in your organizations.
I think we've all been talking about this the whole time, intertwined with all of our responses. And this is where we really can use the data to our benefit. And, everybody's talking about retention and why people are leaving and things of that nature, but we really don't do enough, or potentially don't do enough. I don't want to say that we're not doing enough, but maybe we're not being heard loud enough about the things that we should be focusing on in terms of enhancing an employee's experience and retaining those high potential employees. And in the recruitment process, it starts, we're hiring this person that has all of these skills, capabilities, and knowledge. And then somewhere along the line, we don't have the programs in place to help them continue to grow or to do new things, take risk. The culture has shifted, the organization has changed. Are we taking our employees along with us? I say sometimes employees outgrow organizations and organizations outgrow employees. And why does that happen? And it's usually because we're not doing enough to continue the relationship moving forward. And what data are we using to identify the key attributes of the skills and behaviors of our higher potential? Do we actually know what that looks like in our organization? I see a lot of times is we want a high performance culture and okay, well, what does that look like? And when you're rapidly scaling, it could look like this in June, but in December, it looks like something completely different because the organization has grown. So first, what's the criteria? What are the tools that we're going to use for assessment? What data are we going to analyze performance on? Now we have this whole examining the learning agility and things of that nature. With only a few minutes left, I want to leave the floor open for our other panelists to chime in, because I know this is a very passionate project for our topic for all of us.
All right, I might actually just move on just quickly because, again, for 5 minutes, I probably didn't manage time that couldn't well enough early. And if we just talk, and we've spoken about this next topic as well, and really about just how we can use analytics to help protect the employee turnover and implement retention strategies, I guess, focusing on the retention. And what are your thoughts on that, Sally?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just finish up with your chat, Alyssa. Either way, you were the most passionate about it. So I think you hit the nail on the head with the question. So, I mean, in terms of retention strategies, again, we have been talking about this a lot. But if you understand what is happening within your organization based on the KPIs that we've already discussed and the data points that we've already discussed, then there is a lot of things that you can do within retention. Retention actually starts in the recruitment process, right? So what was their experience like within the recruitment process? Even if you're getting data right out of the recruitment process about, did people communicate with me fast enough? Were they transparent? Was it what they said it would be once I joined the organization? I think that's what I would lead this conversation with, is regardless of what it is, be it engagement, be it all the other KPIs we talked about, build your storyline, because retention truly starts at the recruitment process, which we often forget about. So I would leave it at that and see if anybody has comments on it.
Thanks, Sally. All right, well, I might come to our last question, which is just a common one, really. And for everyone, just have a go at this one, which is just what's one key takeaway you'd leave, to our audience to implement after this discussion? What would be the one key point they should take away? And start with Emily and go around.
Awesome. Well, I think my one key takeaway for everyone is always just to start with the end in mind. So know what goal you're trying to aim at, and then create the research study and the analytics that you need to get there. And then just want to say this has been a great conversation. So I'd love to continue the conversation on LinkedIn or other place. Just connect. I'd love to talk more.
Thanks, Emily. Sally.
I'll piggyback. Not only great point, start with the end in mind, but also just start. Start getting the data. If you can't compare it to historical, like I said earlier, compare it to your other industry competitors, you name it. But definitely start somewhere. And then I'm just going to add one little thing that perhaps we didn't totally talk about. As an organization, be transparent about what data you're gathering. I think that, yes, you own the computer, the software, the hardware, but you are going to get more participation if you're transparent in the recruitment process or in your policies that we do track this or we do track that. And this is what we do with that data. So I think that was worth mentioning as well.
Thank you. And Vaclav.
We have talked a lot about HR data, HR metrics, HR KPIs, but I would like to say that I think companies should not only focus on or HR, even ourselves, we should not only focus on the HR KPIs and HR metrics. We should also combine them with the business KPIs and business metrics and tie it all back to the business strategy and draw the conclusions from that.
Yep, absolutely. And last but not least, Alyssa.
I agree with everything that everybody said. So I'm trying to come up with something new and ingenious, but I think the big thing is don't forget that we're in the business of people. While data is super helpful, we're still we're working with other people and we're dynamic. and grace and patience goes a long way too.
Thank you. And I guess there you have it. So I guess, and I think what you've just said there is so critical. We've got to remember data isn't just a bunch of numbers. It's actually the data that we have is really the story about your people. People is what it's actually all about. And by really being able to be effective with your data, that helps, become the compass to help you towards better hiring, happier employees, and a more successful company. And I think one of the key things we also heard throughout the conversation this morning is that, in the world of HR, knowledge is power. Knowledge actually does bring HR into the conversations, and where the knowledge comes from is from the data that unlocks that. So it's really about how do we get effective with our data that enables us to be able to have shared knowledge, improve the business, and enable happier employees. So thank you, panelists, and thank you for those who joined us today, and look forward to future panels and collaborating as well on LinkedIn, etc. All right, so thank you. Bye. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.